From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Burcell. This is The Log. I Googled the word abolish because I was curious. I do this sometimes. The autofill is a fascinating feature of the internet and of Google specifically, and even of your various word programs or texting. But Google especially, because it predicts what you might be thinking based on previous searches, millions and billions of previous searches. So every once in a while, just out of curiosity, I'll type in a word and see what follows. And the other day I typed in abolish because I've been thinking a lot about the modern abolitionist movement. And if that's something you're not familiar with, I don't blame you. It gets no attention in any sort of mainstream media or what some people call legacy media. You have to be elsewhere to even hear the word. Anyway, Google came up with only a couple of suggestions. According to that front page, the top searches suggested abolish the penny. Okay, I could see that. Abolish the penny. A lot of people have thought this for a long time. But of course, the folks in Illinois aren't having that. We got several representatives in the House and a couple of senators over on the other side of the building who want nothing to do with abolishing the penny because they like their Lincoln penny. And I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but the last I read, it costs more to make a penny than a penny. It costs more than 1 cent. Here, let's look this up right now. How much does it cost to make a penny? In fiscal year 2010, each cent cost 1.79 cents, according to Wikipedia. After reaching a peak cost of 2.4 cents, 2.41 to be precise, in 2011, the cost declined to 2 cents in 2012. All right, so it's a volatile market here. 1.83 the next year, and then 1.67. The latest figure they have is about 1.5 cents. But we keep doing it. Let's see here. According to coinnews.net, in fiscal year 2020, it took 1.76 cents to make, administer, and distribute the 1 cent coin. So it's all pretty damn silly. It is. And it's been silly for a long time. I suppose we ought to abolish physical money entirely. I imagine there are debates on that can be found. I won't engage in that debate. I'm sure others have thought about it, and I have not. Just shooting from the hip, it seems to make sense to abolish physical money. Don't really need it. It carries germs. It costs money to create and distribute and keep track of. But again, most anybody in the world has thought more about this than I have. So I'll leave that to others. What else does Google suggest we should abolish, at least according to prior searches? Abolish the Electoral College. There is some debate that I'm willing to listen to on that issue, but not much. I've fallen squarely on the side of abolishing the Electoral College. There is a concept in the ideal of American government as envisioned by those who would idealize American government. And I'm one of them. I like the idea of self-governance. With all the flaws of the original founders and the original founding documents, and there are plenty of flaws, the general idea of small d democracy and self-governance and representative government, I'm fine with. There's a lot to be said. So within that context, I do understand the political theory wherein minority rights are embedded within a system of majority rule. It's a tricky dance. And that's one thing I'll give the founders credit for, is that very thing, that, yeah, small d democracy, majority rules, but you can't have the tyranny of the majority. You have to have some mechanism by which those in the minority still retain their rights and have some representation in government ensured. So when you think about it that way, you can make an argument for the Electoral College. Now, it's not a great argument. It's the one I learned in school. When I learned civics, when I learned American government in grade school, in middle school, and high school, the Electoral College was a perfectly natural and good thing because it did exactly what I was talking about. It struck that balance. It guaranteed a voice for those in the minority, and it thwarted the very real possibility, as the founders saw it, of this so-called tyranny of the majority. So I get it. I get the argument. But I don't think the founders anticipated. It's so funny when we're always so concerned about the founders. One of the best arguments against being so loyal to the founders is there's no way they could anticipate. Now, I often point out, again, to their credit, they were self-aware enough to know and humble enough to admit that no, they couldn't predict the future 100 or 200 or 300 years down the line. So they wrote into the Constitution some flexibility. They left some language intentionally just a little bit vague. They gave to us designed flexibility. You shouldn't be able to willy-nilly just amend one part of the Constitution today and amend another part of the Constitution tomorrow and do it as a daily practice. No, they made it difficult, but they also made it possible. And so when I'm talking about anticipation here, they did not anticipate, I don't think, today's Republican Party. Well, as I say that out loud, I'm thinking, well, maybe they did. They did have a lot of warnings about wannabe tyrants. And they had warnings. George Washington himself famously warned about the danger of the party system and how a party can be a tool for tyranny. So yeah, come to think of it, they did warn us, didn't they? And we've reached that point. The Electoral College is now being abused. Just like, we talked about, it's happening as we speak, the redistricting and the gerrymandering. These are all ways of abusing the system, so it no longer protects the rights of the minority party, but we're in danger now of permanently surrendering power to the minority party. Minority rule. We all know out of the last, eight presidential elections, only one of those elections came out for the Republican in the popular vote. It was the re-election of George W. Bush. He narrowly defeated John Kerry in the popular vote. Every other election, the Republican has lost the popular vote, but a few times found a way to win the electoral votes. That's why we've even had any Republican presidents in the last 30, 40 years. I mentioned just the other day, was it just yesterday? Or very recently, here in Wisconsin, less than 50%, 40-something, 45, 46, is the percentage of vote that the Republicans get statewide. And yet, year after year, they get approximately 64, 65% of the seats in the House and the Assembly, the state assembly. Well, these are roads we've gone down before, you and I. It's absolutely vital. There's no way around it. We have to find a way to pass this federal legislation regarding voting rights, held up currently by Sinema and Manchin. So, abolish the Electoral College. Yeah. And then there's only one other one. And this is kind of what surprised me. Again, I looked up abolish and then let Google tell me what word comes next. I expected to see pages of results, and I only got these 3. Abolish the Slavery Amendment. Yeah, that's something that I didn't even know, I never heard about this growing up. I was never taught this in school. This ought to be common knowledge. It took me until I was an adult to even know that it existed. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution says, I'm quoting, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." All right, sounds pretty good, right? Abolishes slavery. Well, I skipped a clause. Yep, I skipped the clause, a very important one. Here it is. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So slavery was never abolished entirely. Slavery shall not exist within the United States except, there's an exception. Slavery may exist in the United States. Right up until this day, this is the law of the land. How has this not been amended? Slavery as a punishment for crime. Well, have that debate over the dinner table tonight. Yeah, I looked up abolish. Wanted to see what people were searching. And I was disappointed because I wanted to see in that Google search that everybody was looking for abolish money, abolish borders, abolish the police, abolish prisons, abolish political parties. Each one of these needs to be abolished. I've talked about some of these at length before. I'll talk about them again. They come up from time to time. I am convinced that there's no way we get around money. As long as it exists, there'll always be an arms race. Even if we had our ideal candidates win every election, rise in office, rise to positions of power, pass legislation that we just love. We got the Green New Deal. We got tax codes that are fair, tax the rich, protect the poor, a fairer distribution of wealth. We could just have a utopia of laws. But as long as money exists in this world, as long as profit is still a thing, it'll be a constant arms race. There will remain forever this incentive to cheat, to lie, to work the system, to work around the system. Even the best system we can devise. I can't, in my most optimistic utopian vision of the world, I can't imagine one where money just doesn't foul everything up. And I do mean everything. Families, music, art, culture, all of it. In addition to the obvious problems of wage slavery, tax evasion, income inequality, the whole world of crime, whether it's street crime or so-called white-collar crime, the entire world of crime is completely engulfed within the concept of money. Abolish money, and it's gone. Well, let's not go down that road completely today. You and I have talked about it at length plenty of times. We'll get back to it. Abolish borders. There again, the very idea that we can live in this gated community, which the United States is, and which every European country is, so every so-called developed country is a gated community where people and corporations are free to leave and go out shopping the global south for resources and then come back. But then you come back and you close those gates behind you. And you don't let people follow, you don't let immigrants follow, refugees follow. Now, you go out and take from the world and then go back to the gated community. That's what developed countries versus developing countries, or I hate the terminology. Rich versus poor, oppressor versus oppressed. I think that's the most accurate. There's nothing natural about any of this. And I don't like the term developed versus developing either, because the so-called rich nations, the so-called developed nations, have developed in such an unhealthy way as to literally destroy the earth before our eyes. So that language of develop and developing suggests within itself that poor nations or developing nations have every right to develop, just like we've developed. Well, I understand the sentiment behind that thought, but it's just impossible. We have to have, finally, once and for all, a balance of needs and wants, a rejection of consumer society. And I can hear you complain, and I don't blame you because I admit it. Well, yeah, okay, so rich developed countries have gained all this wealth, and now you lefties want to say, well, since the whole world can't have it because it wreaks havoc on the environment, on the globe itself, you're going to tell developing countries, well, no, you can't have the riches that we've had. You can't develop like we have. So I understand why this is a very unpopular argument. I really do. But it doesn't change the fact. Every poor country, every so-called developing country cannot reach the heights of so-called developed countries. We can't all be on top of this mountain. It's environmentally impossible. It can't be done. Everybody in China can't have a car. Everybody on the continent of Africa can't be rich. So we just have to change our priorities. And I'm sorry if it sounds like, yeah, well, I got mine. I'm part of a rich nation. I'm living within the gates of this gated community. I got mine, you can't have yours. I'm the first to admit, yeah, that's a problem. But it doesn't change the fact that it's virtually physically, in every way, impossible for the entire world to live like you do in the suburbs. Talking to you now, who's in the suburbs. Karen, talking to you now, Karen. Everybody can't live Karen's lifestyle. The globe can't sustain that. So then the question becomes, well, what do we do about it? Sorry, Karen. The only way you can maintain your lifestyle is to keep half the globe or 3/4 of the people on the globe down. To keep them poor, to keep them oppressed. That's the only way you keep it. You keep what you have. That's a hard truth. Sorry, it's true. Tell me I'm wrong. Show me how I'm wrong. Show me how everybody can live Karen's lifestyle. Show me how every family in China, every family in India, every family on the African continent, name the continent, anywhere. Every family can have Karen's suburban lifestyle, and the world will be fine. The world can sustain that. Show me how that works. Okay, it doesn't. So what's the answer then? Well, we have to reestablish the definition of success, of material wealth. I've already said I want to abolish money. I want to abolish profit. I want to abolish borders, because that's the only way we can live in a world that claims to have any sense of justice. Now, in the arguments I've made over time, and I've made this argument a few times, I believe that if we were able to level this off, that the so-called privileged people, the rich people, would discover very quickly that they've never really had the freedoms that they wanted. They've never really had the lives they wanted. That material possessions, material wealth, never gave them a life of peace and contentment. The research on this is done. The answers are in. We know the truth of this. It's way past opinion. It's past theory. It's just fact. That money gets you nothing after a certain point. You have your basic needs met: safety, shelter, housing, clothes, food, healthcare. And then you also get a certain amount of freedom, the ability to pursue art and culture, knowledge, a little bit of the extracurriculars of life, so to speak. You get to a level of basic needs, you're good. And yes, in this world, it takes money. It takes material wealth to get that stature. But anything above that, now we're talking riches and yachts and all of that, doesn't make you happy. Doesn't help you. For those billions of people, half the earth literally, who are struggling materially, they don't have the basic needs. They're lacking in one or two or all of them. That is safety, housing, healthcare, food, water, the basics, education, an ability to reach some potential, to have some leisure. Any sort of economic system that is at all defensible has to, at the very least, minimum requirement, guarantee that level for every man, woman, and child on earth. If you can't provide that, your system is not worthy of debate. And we're not even there. Some of us are trying to, some of you are trying to defend a system that literally requires 3/4 of the earth's population to go wanting. Because that's the system we're in now. And it's because of money, and it's because of borders. So I'm for abolishing money. I'm for abolishing borders. And then I think I mentioned earlier, political parties. George Washington tried to warn us. They're way too dangerous. It's like he begged us, don't dip your toes in that water. You're going to get swept in by that current and just drown by it. And we've seen what parties are capable of. You and I had a long conversation about the Coalition of Independents. I've referred back to that a couple of times. There's nothing good that a party can do for you. You can have political theory, sure. You can have ideas. You can even have alliances with people. You can have good collaboration. There are ways to work with people, and right now we're talking about the political work, the very act of making collective decisions. We have to make some collective decisions, yeah. Again, I'm a small d Democrat. I believe in it. I believe in representative government. But there's absolutely no need for political parties. They do infinitely more harm than good. They do no good that I could find. Absolutely no reason in this world we couldn't function as a self-governing nation in a fair and just world without this ridiculous notion of parties. They're completely unnecessary at best and fatally dangerous at worst. So, yeah, I'm an abolitionist. And I was disappointed when I Googled up abolish blank, and these didn't show up. We should abolish money. We should abolish borders. We should abolish political parties. And then the others I mentioned, they're way too complicated. This is a tough argument to have. I'm still working on it. And that's police and prisons. There are excellent arguments to be made, especially abolishing the police. Almost the entirety of what police do could be done better by other professionals. I guess today's a bit of a recap. We've talked about all these things before, and we'll talk about them again. So I don't want to get far into the weeds. But the one little thing I'll repeat is that police work consists almost entirely of work that happens after the crime has been committed. Police have almost nothing to do with crime prevention. I mean, they have crime prevention programs, and they put cops out on patrol. That's supposed to deter. And they catch the bad guys. That's supposed to deter future bad guys. Yeah, I'm trying to make the argument for you, but it's so damn weak. Almost the entirety of what cops do happens after the fact. So if we reimagine public safety, and this is just really boilerplate stuff. They tried to pass it in Minneapolis in the most recent election, and it failed. Just a really simple reimagining of public safety. You put your resources into prevention. And in a wider scope, that's the basics. Once again, we were talking about them before. Housing, healthcare, education. If you have all these material needs, your basic material needs met, that's going to reduce crime by, I don't know, you tell me, half, 75%, 90%? If people are not wanting, they're not going to go out and looking for trouble. And when there is trouble, so many cases of mental health crises where a guy with a gun has absolutely no place in the situation. So we don't have to go down every talking point here. I've made my position clear over the last couple of years, and I'll continue to talk about it. But yeah, I'm not ashamed of using the term abolish the police. Oh yeah, you get into semantics. Everybody gets so excited about abolish or defund, and then we get blamed for losing elections. It's all so ridiculous. Call it what you want. We have to completely reimagine public safety. There are much better ways to do this that will both reduce crime, certainly reduce the corruption of the police, certainly reduce violence, police brutality, police-initiated violence. And then the toughest one of all, I'll leave for another time, because I'm not equipped to make this argument. I've read some really good material here on the abolition of prisons. There are better ways. I'm not the guy to make that argument today. I would encourage you to go find the literature on this, because it's an established movement and has been for quite some time. The alternatives to the current prison system. Certainly no nonviolent person should ever be incarcerated. Ever. Should ever be put into that kind of a system. There are ways to deal with wrongdoers depending on what they've done. So many people currently residing in the carceral state, they need mental health care. They need some sort of rehabilitation. They're suffering from learning disabilities, from lifelong and debilitating economic want. I mean, there are so many reasons. Every person has a story, and every person has a path out. Are there dangerous people that need to be removed from society for everyone's safety? For their own safety? Yes. But to use that small minority, and it is a small minority, to justify this trillion-dollar boondoggle of private and state prisons is just laughably ridiculous. So I'm not today going to lay out the perfect plan of how public safety should look. But there are plenty of great alternatives out there. And that's true, generally speaking, for the abolitionist movement. Nobody claims to have a perfect design, but it is almost simple, embarrassingly simple, to point out the flaws of the current system, to point to the possibilities of alternative systems, and to say, let's commit to moving in those directions. At the very least, we can say that. So yes, I am a self-proclaimed, self-defined abolitionist. Money, profit, borders, political parties, police, and prisons. I am an unabashed, unashamed abolitionist. And I think it's important that more of us embrace that and say it out loud. There you go. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.